again, really good to be here this afternoon. And again, just to say thanks to Sheila and Rachel. I think we've got a fantastic report with some really important recommendations, as well as Anchor. And again, really good to hear from Sarah and Dave just now as well. So I suppose I'm going to try and keep things relatively brief this afternoon, conscious that we want to allow a bit of time for some Q&As. So I'm just going to tell you all a bit about Habinteg's history and our background, and I think the role we play within this particular debate. I'll tell you a bit about our in-house consultancy team, the Centre for Accessible Environments, and some of the work they've been doing. And then finally, I'll just share some of the work we've been doing in terms of influencing national decision makers, because I think there's an overlap there in terms of promoting inclusive design and the link between inclusive design and ensuring that adaptations can be delivered in an effective way, which is something we've been pushing for several years now. So I suppose if we just move on just to my first slide. So again, this is me. So as I said, Nic Bungay, Director of Housing and Assets at Habinteg. I suppose just before I kind of tell you a bit about the history of the organisation, I just wanted to kind of touch on just some of the themes that have been coming up in the discussion this afternoon. I thought it might be helpful for me just to mention, I know it's not covered in this particular slide, but some of the work we've been doing working with Home Finder UK and other partners about developing what we're describing as the Accessible Now pilot. So what we've done within this project is trying to encourage housing associations to share details of their wheelchair accessible homes, their homes where NRP or council has invested in adaptations, and we can kind of share that on a website and promote that to disability groups to share that with their stakeholders. So I can see that James from the team's kindly shared a link, and more than happy to send people some bit of background information around what we're doing with the pilot and next steps, because I think there's certainly some learning there in terms of some of the discussions that we've had earlier this afternoon. I know another topic that's come up today has been trusted assessors, and that's something that Habinteg have also focused on, and the Centre for Accessible Environment that I mentioned, the CE, can certainly offer some support if people in the audience here are interested in taking that forward, and I can touch on CE shortly. So I suppose just to go back to the history of the organisation, we've got over 50 years experience in terms of delivering inclusive homes. We were founded by the team who founded Scope, and I think the kind of principles at the time were very much about promoting the idea that disabled people shouldn't live in segregated communities. They shouldn't live in separate parts of a particular town. So that's where this idea of integration came in, and we believed then, just as we believe now, that disabled people should be living side by side with family members, with able-bodied people within kind of mixed developments. And that's something that our founders were very passionate about, and that's something that we carry forward today. We have 3,300 homes operating in over 80 local authorities. So you can hear from that we're relatively unique as an organisation in terms of being still relatively small, but actually spread out across large parts of England and Wales as well, which of course comes with some challenges and opportunities, particularly around linking in with local agencies and local authorities around adaptations. I think several people here in the audience today might know us from our Lifetime Homes standard, and that's something that people do still talk about today. We've kind of built on that Lifetime Home standard to develop the Wheelchair Housing Design Guide, and again, happy to share information from audience members today if people wanted to know more about the Wheelchair Housing Design Guide. So as I said, I think we've been championing, this idea of kind of inclusive homes to ensure that people have independence and an excellent quality of life. Just to say a bit about the new homes that we're building, again, it might differ in some parts of the country where we might operate, but typically will be, in terms of our new homes, 75% will be built to the category 2 standard, homes that are accessible and adaptable, and then about 25% built to the wheelchair accessible standard. And I think about those 3,300 tenants that we have across the country, again, over half are disabled, and about a third of those tenants are wheelchair users. And again, here you can see Edward Heath opening our one of our first schemes in 1973 at Moira Close, and Sir Bert Massey pictured here. I think many of you might know the late Sir Bert Massey, former Habinteg tenant and chair of what was known as the Disability Rights Commission. And again, championing this idea of lifetime homes was really important then, through people like Sir Bert and the people that founded the organisation, in terms of promoting this idea of inclusive design, accessibility. And I know someone like the late Sir Bert was always very passionate about the option to visit his neighbours from time to time, and that's sometimes something that we often hear from disabled people, in terms of, people want to go out and visit their friends and family, and that's often something that people have struggled with when a home isn't accessible or the adaptations haven't been provided. And certainly that was echoed in a YouGov poll that Habinteg ran a couple of years ago, when we found that I think the vast majority of the general public, I think it was certainly over 80% of people we surveyed, said that they wouldn't be able to invite a friend or family member who is a wheelchair user into their home for a cup of tea or a catch up because their home just wasn't accessible. So again, that's something we've certainly been promoting over the years and something we want to change going forward. I mentioned the Centre for Accessible Environments, so they're Habinteg's in-house consultancy team, and again, CE have been doing a lot of work recently with housing associations, with councils. We've got a range of different courses that, again, there's been a link shared across the chat, so I'd encourage you to look at those courses and just have a think in terms of overcoming some of the challenges we've been talking about today, some of the challenges as part of the report. I think there's a role that our in-house team can certainly play in terms of putting on quite specific tailored courses for people to address some of those challenges. And some of them might be about trusted assessors, or some of the other themes that the CE might be able to support people with. But again, just to give you a kind of flavour of some of the work that they've been doing, kind of typically in terms of clients at the Centre for Accessible Environments, it might be anything from kind of public sector organisations to corporate organisations, but then again, our kind of public training courses that we offer as well, to help kind of navigate people through that kind of maze sometimes when it comes to accessibility and inclusive design. So I'm just going to kind of move on to just a final slide I had here, and just keen to say a bit about our campaigning work, and I think the overlap that does have around overcoming some of those challenges around adaptations and delivering that excellent service, because we know that when homes are built to the accessible and adaptable standard, category 2 homes, broadly equivalent to what was known as the lifetime home standard, then adaptations can be fitted much more quickly and much more easily. So it feels like we have to get that right, and I think that can certainly then help pave the way to us as a sector being able to deliver a better adaptation service. So that's why for several years the organisation's been campaigning for the accessible and adaptable standard to become mandatory. That's the situation within London, when all new homes are built to that standard, with a set proportion built to the Cat 3 standard there as well. So we want to see that policy change. Just last week, we brought together various leaders across the sector. I think several audience members here were there as part of that event. Eddie Hughes, who's the minister who's championing accessible homes, came and spoke at that event. And then again, we heard from a range of organisations in terms of how we can overcome those challenges when it comes to delivering accessible and adaptable homes. That's why at Habinteg, we're putting pressure on those decision makers at a national level to get that baseline right when it comes to ensuring that all new homes are built to the accessible and adaptable standard. So another piece of work we've used to take that forward has been our Housing Made for Everyone, or HOME Coalition. So we co-chair that group with the Centre for Ageing Better, and we've brought together kind of 10 organisations across the sector, including the National Housing Federation, including REBA, and several others, so we can really kind of help put this issue on the agenda, and we can kind of raise that topic of accessible homes across national and local decision makers and within Parliament as well. So I think what we're all waiting for is the response to the government consultation on accessible homes. So that was published now some time ago in terms of the call out for evidence, and we're now waiting for that outcome to see if we will change that kind of policy on the ground. So I'll certainly keep everyone up to date today. And again, the reason I was keen to mention that today is because of that overlap that I mentioned around those principles of inclusive design and delivering that excellent adaptation service, and those two principles, I think, going hand in hand. So again, conscious of time, and I know I'm going to kind of pause there, so we've really got the opportunity for some additional questions. And I know, Paul, you were kind of pausing some of the questions earlier, so that's why I was kind of keen to try and take a few things out of the presentation today, so we just have time to have that particular discussion. But again, thanks to you, Paul, and Foundations, and thanks also, of course, as I said earlier, to Sheila and Rachel and Sarah and Dave as well. So happy at this point to hand back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, and thank you for your support with developing this. This report has been very much appreciated. So if we could ask Dave, Rachel and Sheila to rejoin us. We've got a few questions that have come in, so I'll pick a few of them in the short time we've got left. So probably for kind of Sheila and Rachel, there's kind of a few kind of questions around kind of equalities, and I think we kind of hear the phrase tenure neutral quite a lot when we've been looking at this report. And I suppose it's kind of a balance between, should you treat everybody the same, or should you develop policies and processes that ensure everybody has equality of outcomes? Did you kind of have any thoughts on that, having kind of had those conversations throughout the last couple of years?
Shall I come in on that one? It is difficult. I mean, we've already got inequality, huge amounts of inequality with the systems that we're working at the moment, you know, between authorities that are means testing everybody and those who are stopped means testing, and you know, nothing is very fair as things are going at the moment. And I think with this report, what we were trying to do was deal with one area of real complexity, which is the housing associations, because you know, we know they're using a third of the DFG, that in some areas they're using this huge proportion of the DFG. And if we could make that work better, then we get that part to, you know, you've got to just take bits at a time with this system. Otherwise, we just go back to the drawing board and we start again. We have new legislation. Nobody really wants to have new legislation because we don't want to lose the DFG. It's so valuable. It is this one mandatory grant that we still have. But we've got to try and make it work better. So we've started with this one area to see if we can address that. There has been a separate report about the private rented sector to try and get more landlords to come forward and understand about the DFG, know they can use the DFG. So I think there is a big movement now to try and engage there to get the private rented sector work better. I would have loved to have looked at the council stock with this report, but we just didn't have the resources to be able to do that. I think that still needs to be looked at to go alongside this. And then we've got to think about the owner-occupiers as well. There is low-income owner-occupiers who have no help from anybody. Most of them don't even know that the DFG exists. If we can get the housing association bit working better, we can get more housing associations taking more responsibility, then it frees up the time of the OTs and the DFG teams to look after those low-income owner-occupiers and some of those private rented tenants who desperately need help because they don't have it from anybody else at all.
Yeah. I think the other thing, just to come in on the back of that, is that obviously the headline grabbing one that everybody's going to land on is the landlord application for the DFG, but there are some other quite fundamental recommendations in there that will help support the whole wider adaptations, the design guide, so that adaptations get reused more easily. the policy recommendations, so that we look at where we get consent. One of the biggest issues is getting consent, and one of the primary reasons for saying a landlord application is that it puts that onus and puts that ownership within the housing association, who already have that direct link with their tenant. They already have that one-to-one relationship as a landlord and tenant. And as Sheila rightly says, there's already inequity between tenures, and there's already inequity and inequality between local authorities. If you live on the edge of a local authority area, you can cross the road and get something different.
Just to
I suppose one of the other points was just around, I suppose, kind of the shift in resources. If kind of landlord grants take off, I suppose kind of shift in resources probably from local authorities to housing associations. So kind of housing association staff in the chat say I can't do any more, and local authority people in the chat saying, well, where's our funding going? So I think that will kind of be a longer term shift around it if that comes to pass.
Yeah, and I mean, it is going, that is a challenge, and it is a challenge for, you know, I work with organisations and with local authorities where actually if we were to just suddenly move to complete landlord applications, then the funding for the local authority home improvement agency service would struggle because it's fee based. So that's where that partnership working comes in. And can that support, how do we shift that support around? How do we move that support? What support can we make available for our tenants?
And I suppose, Rachel, just to jump in on that and covering kind of Sheila's point as well, which I thought was really well made in terms of, you know, what are the kind of drivers that we're seeing from, say, the regulator for social housing in terms of helping us to get there and make sure we've got that tenant focused approach. Certainly, you know, obviously the regulator is now consulting on some new tenant satisfaction metrics, and quite rightly the kind of pressure there around kind of improving and developing our customer satisfaction, but then equally we've got the pressures around value for money and void turnarounds and relet times, and I think that came up loud and clear in that brilliant focus group that you chaired, Sheila, in terms of at the beginning of this process. And I think that was often that tension that we hear about, that yes, we want that kind of time to deliver that great service to tenants, but then when it comes to adaptations and we've got the pressure also placed on the sector around voids and relet times, there can be that tendency to then, as we've said, kind of take out adaptations, or an able-bodied family will then move into a home that's perhaps more suited to a user because there just isn't the time to reach out and find people that might be suitable. So I think hopefully we could have that opportunity now in terms of those new metrics from the regulator to ensure that we're taking that tenant-centred approach.
I would really like that to happen, and I think, you know, people like yourself, Nick, maybe because you've probably got a closer relationship with the regulator and things like that, it's maybe talking about these issues and actually referring them to this report and saying, look, you know, this is what used to happen. And I just know what a difference it made when the Audit Commission short notice inspections happened. Because I was actually looking at this very issue in 2008 with Habinteg's support, actually, the previous report that we did, and we were able to chart the increase in resources that were going in from housing associations. So it wasn't money coming out of the DFG, it was money coming into adaptations, because housing associations were finally starting to put in bigger budgets and actually giving much more importance to this whole area, and the staffing levels went up, the budgets went up. So, and that's what we've got to think about. This isn't a kind of zero-sum game, is it? It's about kind of getting attention into this area and getting this whole, the importance of inclusive housing much, much higher up everybody's agenda, so we get more resources into it, not kind of just worry about how we're cutting the existing cake.
Good point, Sheila. Let's certainly kind of share the report with you know, people like the ministerial champion who I mentioned, who came to our event last week, and we've got you know, one of our board members who's again one of the government's kind of champions around accessible homes. So again, I think there are certainly some levers there I think we can start pushing at. Now we've got some fantastic recommendations and kind of making sure they're getting plugged into the right people in the right places so we can help push that forward.
Great, thank you, Bill. And just one quick question for you, Dave, in terms of having OTs at short-hand notice to go and do kind of void inspections. Where'd you get them from was the question, basically.
Just out of that resource that we have, so as part of that contract, so we've got 5 OTs from the NHS in our organisation. So we just separate time for OT assessments, or for medical rehousing assessments, and then also accompanied employed and accompanied viewings and such like that. So it just helps make that informed decision really when we've got customers looking at potential prospective properties, just to ensure that it will meet the recommendations that they've got in place from the health and medical plan, but also that property is going to be sustainable for them and meet the long-term needs. Yeah.
So presumably the NHS recognise the kind of investment and prevention that they can provide by kind of seconding OTs within the housing association.
Yeah, because I mean, I also attend like a vulnerable adults forum and also anticipatory care meetings in Wakefield. So the idea is, again, it's what Rachel and Sheila alluded to, really, that prevention rather than cure scenario. Really, if we've got the property right and it's stacked up with the right adaptations, they're less likely fall and then need any A&E attendance, any hospital administration, any stay in hospital. So yeah, we try and work it from a system approach really, and having that knowledge and appreciation of some of the pressures that they experience, and likewise what we do, we try and put that collective spin on it to try and make sure that both partners are getting something out of that partnership arrangement really.
Great.